Hello, everyone. Thanks for attending today's event. My name is Lonnie Mattis Curry, and we can't wait to introduce you to this panel of amazing researchers we have for you today. But first, just a couple things. Next slide. So this is a live event, and we will post a recording and share with you the recording after the event. We will also take some questions today, and if you could just please put your questions in the Q&A box at the right side of the screen, we will answer them following the panel. And then there's closed captioning available if you need it. So as you can see, you can just click on the video controls and that will get you to closed captioning. So first, I'd like to kick off this event by introducing today's panel moderator. That's Kenya Oduor. Kenya comes to us from North Carolina, and she too is an amazing researcher and engineer. And she also earned a doctorate from NC State in human factors and experimental psychology. And this makes her the perfect person to moderate our panel today and get into who our researchers are and how they got here. And with that, let's meet Kenya.
Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. I'm so excited about today's panel to hear from each of these wonderful panelists and to get their perspective on research and their role in performing different research and how they got into research. So without further ado, let's get things going. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go round robin and ask each of our panelists, who happen to be brilliant women for Women's History Month, I'm going to ask each of them a question. And so before they answer the question, they're going to give you a little introduction of themselves and then step into answering that question. So starting off, we're going to hear from Katherine Ratliff. My first question to you is, if you could get rid of one threat to the global environment, what would it be?
Thanks, Kenya, for the question, and thank you all for being here listening in today. My brief introduction is that I'm Katherine Ratliff. I'm a physical scientist at the Environmental Protection Agency. I did my undergraduate research and degree at Vanderbilt University and working in earth and environmental sciences, and I did my PhD at Duke University in earth and ocean sciences. And since joining the EPA, I've been working under the Homeland Security Research Program there, which sounds a little scary and out there. But essentially what I do is work on developing tools and strategies for understanding how we can best clean up contamination or pollution in the environment following something like a natural disaster or even something like a terrorist attack. So during those types of events, different types of contaminants can get spread around in the environment, which can be bad not only for the environment, but for humans and for public health. So we work on conducting research to support the science to help understand how best to clean up and protect ourselves against that type of contamination. So going back to Kenya's question, thinking about what types of threats concern me most, well, there's a lot of things out there to keep everybody up at night, unfortunately, but like we said, we're working on the research to keep everybody safe. So currently, I'm focused on, a lot of my work is focused on understanding how to reduce the risk of COVID-19 transmission. So for example, I've been conducting research on looking at alternatives to chemicals for disinfecting surfaces like UV lights or other types of alternative technologies. I've also been working on research to understand how best to reduce airborne transmission of SARS-CoV-2 and COVID-19. So we're looking at different types of technologies to keep us safe in environments where we may not be able to social distance, although clearly social distancing is really important in the primary way which we should all be protecting ourselves. So all that being said, the one thing that makes me most concerned, or the biggest threat that I'd like to eliminate from the global environment, is something that I'm actually not really focused on in my research, but instead it's the contribution that we as humans have to greenhouse gases. And the reason that concerns me is because it contributes to global climate change. And climate change is something that affects us all globally, not just individual communities. And because of that, it's also something that we need to address as a global effort. And so even though that's not the type of threat agent that I work on a day-to-day basis, that's the one thing that's concerning me the most right now. So thank you for that question.
Thank you for that. And it's it's really important, I think, in your response that we not only think about the impact we have on our immediate environment, but the global impact that the things that we do have on others, even that those that aren't near us. So thank you for that. Okay, next we're gonna talk to Shannon Griffin. And Shannon, my question for you is, what is the most surprising thing you've discovered that saliva can tell you about a person's health or well-being?
Hi, everyone. It's nice to be here with y'all today. And thanks, Kenya. That's an excellent question. So I'm going to start by telling you a little bit more about myself and my work. And as you just heard, I'm Shannon Griffin. I'm a biologist at the EPA in Cincinnati, and I've been with the agency since 2006. So throughout my career, I've been very fortunate to work with an incredible group of mentors and colleagues, collaborators, and students. And as part of this great team, we've developed methods which use signals from our bodies called antibodies to let us know if you've been infected with various environmental pathogens. And remember that these are the bad kinds of microorganisms, the things that can make us sick. So most antibody tests use blood for detection of these antibodies, but our technique detects the same antibodies in spit, which is easy to collect, it's cheap, and it's certainly a safer alternative to blood sampling. So I have a little show and tell today. We start with this device. It's called an Oracle sampler, and basically it's just a sponge on a stick. So you collect your saliva by rubbing your gums and your teeth with the sponge, kind of like brushing your teeth. And then once we have the spit, we are off to the lab for analysis. So getting back to Kenya's question, I'd say that one of the most surprising and I think coolest things that we've recently discovered is that we can use saliva as a source of antibodies to learn who is getting sick with COVID-19. So our team drew upon our previous experience with saliva tests to develop an approach to help track the spread of the COVID-19 pandemic. And we've even conducted a study for people recovering from COVID to safely send their saliva samples to us from their homes. So we hope that our research can help us combat the spread of the pandemic and help us better understand the impacts on the population as a whole. And it's all new and exciting research, so stay tuned.
Awesome. So I love the fact that for those of us that are afraid of needles, you can collect samples in a much easier way, but also you get to collect those samples without someone leaving the comfort of their home and that sort of thing. And so it really revolutionizes the way in which we can collect samples and do our analyses. Awesome.
Absolutely, great points.
Love it. All right, moving on. Next we have Eunice Varghese. And Eunice, my question for you is, what does monitoring wastewater involve?
Thanks, Kenya. My name is Eunice Varghese. As all the ladies in this panel, I work for the Environmental Protection Agency, so I'm just going to take a second just to introduce myself really quickly. I'm currently serving as a supervisor for a team of excellent scientists, and I lead a branch named the Biological Contaminants Branch. So I work for the Office of Research, EPA's Office of Research and Development. That means we do a lot more research than regulatory. And in ORD, Office of Research and Development, I work for the Center for Environmental Solutions and Emergency Response. So some of the excellent scientists in my team you're actually going to meet a little bit later, as they also will be answering questions. And so the goal of the branch is to kind of develop scientific information that helps to understand and reduce the risk of different kinds of biological contaminants in water. And what are biological contaminants? Biological contaminants can include viruses like the COVID-19 virus that we'll be talking about, but it also can include other contaminants such as like bacteria and parasites and toxins that come from bacteria. So what's common about all these biological contaminants is that they are all microbial, which means that you can't see them with your bare eyes, and that you need some type of microscope to see them. So behind me, you'll see like a graphical representation of the SARS-CoV-2 virus, and it is a graphical representation. Viruses aren't really colored in real life like that, but this is the SARS-CoV-2 virus, and this virus causes COVID-19. So a little bit about myself. I actually received my Bachelor of Science degree and Master of Science degree from Baylor University. And then I got married and had kids, and I had to take a break and realized like I don't have time to study much anymore. But then I decided I would try to do my PhD degree while I was working and while raising the family. And that was a difficult experience, but it was also something well worth it. And I enjoyed it. I learned a lot through my PhD degree. And I got my PhD from the University of Cincinnati Medical School in the Environmental Genetics and Molecular Toxicology group. So I've been working for the EPA for the last 18 years and have enjoyed the experience. I really enjoy working with the federal government and working with the awesome scientists that are within this federal government. And it's been a great experience for me. So I've also had the unique opportunity to work after I had got my master's degree. I worked in academia, which is kind of like working for research institutes in the university. And I've also worked for industry, looking at all kinds of things that can help clean water. And so I'd love to answer any more questions that you may have in different areas of work later, but I wanted to kind of answer the question that Kenya put forward. So the question is, what does monitoring wastewater involve? So the first thing we need to know is, what is wastewater? Wastewater is commonly referred to as sewage. You guys might hear of it as sewage. So you might say, that is not glamorous at all. These women are working with sewage. But the thing is, why do we study sewage? And the answer is because sewage can tell us a lot about the community. That's right. You may have jokes about this, and I'm sure, but the one I like is, your number 2 is our number 1. So when people get infected with COVID-19, pieces of the virus can be found in feces. Therefore, it'll be found in sewage. So by taking many samples over time, we can watch whether the amount of virus in these samples, in these wastewater samples, are increasing or going up or going down. So this might tell local health departments whether an outbreak is getting better or if it's getting worse, and it can provide more insight to other people about the data that we're collecting. So what have we seen? What we've seen so far is that the levels of virus in the wastewater often match what the numbers of cases in the community are. And so this approach to identifying COVID-19 is still experimental. We are still developing methods in our group about how to detect it and how to detect it well. But the science is actually not new. Actually, monitoring wastewater is something that has happened over many, many years. In fact, wastewater surveillance has been used in countries where polio is still a threat to look for evidence of polio in a community. It's also been used in the United States to see if, to estimate opioid drug usage. So in a community, by testing sewage for chemicals left behind after the body digests different drugs like opioids. And so it's a common way of doing things, but now we're looking at it for COVID-19. And so our team is developing new and innovative approaches as another way to identify the spread of COVID-19 in the community. And so it's great research. It's really forefront research, and I'm excited to be a part of it. I'll end with one corny joke. What do you call a sewer expert? A connoisseur.
I love it. Thank you for that.
Thanks, Kenya.
It's interesting that, I hate to put it this way, but number 2 has a story to tell for all of us. And it's interesting that you can string together insights around what's going on with a community based on the wastewater, which is something a lot of us probably weren't aware of. We don't think about what happens after we flush, but there's a story to tell in terms of the health of that community. So that's great. Thank you. So next up, we have Emily Wheaton. Emily, and I think this is a good segue based on what Eunice just talked about. Tell us the difference between biology and microbiology.
Hi, yes, I'm Emily Wheaton. Yeah, I'm actually one of the excellent scientists that Eunice just talked about here at the EPA. So I've been here for, I think almost 9 years. I started as a student contractor right after I got my graduate degree from Marshall University. And I've been pretty much, worked my way up doing, contractor work to lab tech to, a bench scientist now. So the easiest way I think you can kind of define the difference between biology and microbiology is that if biology was the textbook, it would be the title, and then inside it, every chapter is a different field within biology, so microbiology is just one of those chapters where you can study bacteria, viruses, parasites, Pretty much what Eunice said, like anything that's small, like you need to use a microscope to look for. And I think that's the easiest way to kind of get started. So, and I think what's great is that every chapter kind of blends into each other. So what we do here, we look for, we're looking at wastewater, but more than anything, it's microbial genetics in all kind of water sources. And so we could, look into that as well, not just microbiology. So I hope I answered that clearly enough.
You absolutely did. I think it's important, based on what you said, to understand that biology is kind of the bigger topic, but microbiology is going a little bit deeper in terms of specifics around things that you can see under the microscope. That's a really good way to put it. I think it's also helpful that Emily and Eunice shared their story in terms of how they got to where they are, because as you can see, the path is, there's no straight path. There's no one definition of how you become a scientist. One person approached it through going to school, taking a pause, and then, tackling education and family life and that sort of thing. And Emily talked about her journey and her path, going from different aspects of the organization and working her way through and up in the organization. So something to think about. All right, shifting gears. Now we're going to pose a question to Nicole Brinkman. Nicole, what is the most interesting discovery you've ever made in the research that you perform?
Thank you for the question, Kenya. Hi, everyone. I'm Nicole Brinkman, and I'm a microbiologist. And I work with a great team of scientists and engineers to address a range of environmental and public health issues, such as ways to safely reuse water or how pollution affects the microbial community of rivers and streams, and how, as we've heard already, how wastewater can be used to assess public health. And so to address Kenya's question, unfortunately I haven't yet been able to make a discovery for the good of science. However, as a researcher, I've been able to make many self-discoveries about how science can be used for the betterment of society. And one of those ways that one of those self-discoveries that I've made is a lot of what you've already heard already. So it's how what we consider a waste product, how it can be used to provide information about public health. And so, as Eunice mentioned earlier, so we use wastewater, which is primarily made of flushed toilet water, can provide information about community health. And we've, as Eunice already mentioned as well, as we use this technique in the past for a different kind of virus to assess the transmission in the community. And now, and that brings us to the point today where we can use this type of monitoring system to track COVID-19 in communities. And then, so this is important information because the data that we can produce from wastewater can be used to help prioritize where resources or interventions should be placed and are needed. And so this is helpful information to help combat, the pandemic that we are all intimately aware of these days. So thank you, Kenya.
Absolutely, and I think the key to what you said that I heard was that discoveries don't have to be that we identify some novel idea or concept, but that just finding different ways to use approaches that are already in place, figuring out how to apply those to a different problem is a discovery. And that's what it takes to be a scientist. So good point. All right, next question is for Matri Nagarkar. And your question is, what are microbial communities and why are they so important to aquatic or water-based ecosystems?
Yeah, hi, thanks, Kenya. So my name is Maitreyi, and as if I want to take a second to introduce myself, I am from Virginia, and I did a bachelor's in biology at the College of William and Mary. And then I took a couple years to do more environmental education type work. So we were kind of talking about plastic pollution, talking about plankton, going out on boats with middle schoolers, high schoolers. And I decided that I wanted to continue pursuing research. So I did a PhD at the Scripps Institution of Oceanography in San Diego. So I am a marine microbiologist, but I've now come to the EPA to work with wastewater microbiology. And so I'm part of this SARS-CoV-2 wastewater monitoring project as well. But the question was about what is a microbial community? And so I think Eunice and Emily did a great job explaining, what is a microbe? It's a microscopic organism. So it includes bacteria, different kinds of protists, viruses, and a microbial community is, it's similar to a human community. There's a bunch of individuals in a physical location together, and they interact. And just like a human community, sometimes there are positive interactions where they're helping each other out. Sometimes there's negative interactions where they're competing or they're, cheating. We don't like those as much, but all of these things are happening in a microbial community. And so I just thought I'd give a couple of examples of really cool microbial communities. So in my PhD, what I was looking at is the plankton community. And so there's different types of plankton, including phytoplankton, which are the ones that do photosynthesis. And every time you breathe in, you might think that all of that oxygen comes from trees, but actually more than half of it is coming from the ocean. It's coming from phytoplankton. And so part of what I was looking at is the community of phytoplankton and how ocean conditions might impact who's growing, who's dying, those kind of things. There's also microbial communities you might have heard on coral reefs. So a coral is kind of an interaction between a type of microbe and the actual coral itself. And when we are not creating environments that are conducive for those microbial communities, then that's when the coral bleaching occurs sometimes. And then finally, in wastewater, a lot of times we use microbial communities for good. So those can be used at treatment plants for getting rid of some of the harmful substances and organic matter in wastewater. So there's a lot of different types of microbial communities. We're not really looking at the coronavirus project in the context of microbial communities yet, but I think that every time we're looking at a water sample, there's so many things in there and so many interactions to study. So I'm looking forward to doing that more and happy to take your questions.
Thank you, Maitreyi. That was really, it's really interesting to think about what you explained in terms of those aquatic ecosystems and what was mentioned earlier about global warming. And I can imagine that obviously the temperatures of that ecosystem changing can impact those ecosystems and can have a potentially a negative effect that goes beyond what we understand in terms of the impacts of global warming and what that means to our environment. And that's a really good point. Awesome. So now we're going to cycle through. We've heard from all of our scientists, and now we're going to cycle back through and shift gears and take it to a more personal note. So several of you shared your story to some extent, and so now we're going to talk about how you got to where you are. And so I'm going to go back to Katherine Ratliff and ask the question of what would you tell your teenage self based on what you know now?
Oh gosh, that's a really good question, Kenya. There's lots of things that I would tell my teenage self now. But if I were to hone in on one thing that I think hopefully will be useful for you all listening in today, is to really look at the different types of neat applications for the subjects you're studying. So I remember when I was in school, it was hard not to focus on things like making sure your grades were good or what the next steps would be, where am I going to go to college, thinking about all those sorts of things. And I really didn't take the time sometimes to think about how the subjects that I was learning about would be useful in the real world. So things like science and math that maybe weren't my favorite when I was in high school, it turns out they're really important to me now. And a lot of the reason why maybe I wasn't that excited about them in high school is I didn't realize how important they were for so many different neat applications that I use today. So I wish that I could go back and tell myself, find some cool ways that science or math or whatever the subjects you are writing, reading, whatever the subjects you may not be that excited about just to learn about from the textbook, look at how they're actually used in the real world and identify some things that resonate or seem really cool to you and use those as motivators for reasons for why you might want to spend a little more time studying a particular subject matter. So I wish that I had realized that there were so many neat applications for all the things we study in high school and beyond. And I really was able to hone in on some of those more specialized classes. As you go into college and grad school, it becomes easier to specialize, but I wish I'd taken the time to figure out how those neat applications, how widely they were used when I was in high school. So that would be my advice to myself. Thanks for the question.
Catherine, do you have, or anyone else on the panel, do you have any resources that you could suggest that could help our attendees in connecting the dots between what they're learning in school and finding some interesting applications of that, of science and math?
I can take a quick stab, but I bet others will have some ideas. So one thing you could do is to sign up for some of the EPA webinars and look at all the different ways that EPA or even the other government agencies, so places like NASA or the US Geological Survey, there's endless cool agencies to keep up on. But looking at webinars and understanding how these different agencies or different academic institutions are using the science and their research might give you some new ideas about how you can focus on, or a different perspective on how to think about your science and math or other types of subject matter in school. But interested to hear if others have any ideas too.
Okay. If anything comes up, we can definitely share before the end of the session. Okay, Shannon, what word or words of inspiration do you have for the group?
So that is another excellent question, Kenya. Thank you. And I would say that I was recently listening to a Women in Government seminar with some really amazing lawmakers and scientists. And this group reminded me of some research from 2017 on gender stereotypes and intellectual ability. And the study found that by age 6, girls become less likely than boys to view themselves as, quote, really, really smart, which I guess is the kid equivalent to brilliant. And also at age 6, girls begin to avoid activities said to be for kids who are really, really smart. So you can imagine that this kind of self-limiting belief system can have some pretty serious long-term effects on girls and their confidence. And it's become what's called the dream gap, because some little girls may stop thinking that they can do or be anything at just this young age of only 6. So I'd say my word of inspiration for you is to keep dreaming regardless of your age, and know that you can be whatever it is you dream to be. And remember that we're all here to kind of stand in that gap with you. And to our future scientists, our hope is that if you are able to see it, then you know that you can be it. So I'd say stay curious and keep dreaming. And from a personal note, getting back to our path, how we got here, I am now in a PhD program at the University of Cincinnati, and I just started, I'm in my 3rd year, but it was a decision that I've made in my 40s. So I certainly didn't stop dreaming.
I love that. Congratulations.
Thank you.
I think I can take away from that, and I hope that you all can as well, those of you that are listening in, that you don't have to have the answers now. A lot of us didn't know at your age and even older what was next, but keep dreaming and the possibilities are endless. Awesome. All right, Eunice, you are up next. Who or what inspired you to be a scientist?
So believe it or not, my high school teacher was my inspiration. And I will admit that in high school, I was low-key a nerd. My high school teacher, though, took me under her wings and she opened me up into a world of something I could not see. So that's what the microbial aspect I was telling you about, stuff that we can't see, but it's there. We just can't see it unless we look in through a microscope. So she started to teach me about the cell and what goes inside the cell. And she also showed me how the environment can affect the cell and what happens to the cell. And so I started realizing that whatever happens in a cell can affect our organs, and whatever can affect our organs can affect our whole body. So I actually got inspired to do a science fair project in high school where I looked at a community who was exposed to benzene from their drinking water. And benzene is a chemical that's often found like in gasoline, and it can cause cancer. And at that time, I didn't know a lot. I didn't even know how to measure benzene in water. But what I did was I started surveying the community about health issues that they were having after exposure to benzene. And it was very sad to do the survey because I realized that there were many people suffering from illnesses, and some had been diagnosed with cancer after exposure to benzene. And so it made me realize what an impact things in our environment, whether it be microbial or chemical, whatever we don't see, can have an impact on our bodies. And so, but I will say the good news is that, you know, because we were able to detect it, because the community was able to do some science around it, they were able to clean up the water and give good guidance to the community and therefore take the risk away of benzene from the community. So they were able to fix the issue. And so science was able to do that. So I didn't know that much, but my high school teacher gave me guidance and kept teaching me. So one takeaway message is to respect your teachers and don't be afraid to ask them for guidance on things that you're curious about and what you want to learn and even what you want to do in the future. Feel free to talk to them about it. They can give you guidance on all of those things. Teachers are great, and I'm sure all of our panelists will agree that the teachers have had an enormous impact on who we are today.
Yes, I agree. We can all remember that favorite teacher. Some of you may be experiencing your favorite teacher in your life right now, but appreciate those relationships and that connection that you make with them and them helping you to take your scientific interest to the next level. Thank you for that. Okay, next up is Emily. Emily, what do you enjoy most about your role?
Well, there's a lot of things I enjoy about my role, but I think the main one is that, you know, you get to work with some amazing people and various projects as a lab tech, and you kind of go from person to person, and they have their own ways of teaching, and you kind of just take it all in. And then the more you know, you're able to go into the lab and do what you follow protocol. And if you really just enjoy that, then that's a great place to be to do science, because you don't necessarily have to have all the answers, but you know that you can get, you know, whatever you're doing and get it done right and feel that's a big accomplishment and feel great about it. So I really enjoy that, and just being able to work with everybody in different projects, and yes, it's challenging some days, but you know, it's very rewarding in the end.
Good. And what I heard coming out of your statement was the importance of teamwork, and that when you're a part of a team, different people have different roles on that team. Each and every role is important, and without the collective, you couldn't get things done. So it's a key point.
Yes, it's a very good point. Yeah.
Yeah. Nicole, next question. What common environmental challenge should young people care about?
Well, that's a great question, Kenya. And while there are many environmental challenges that we should all care about, but I think one challenge in particular that young people can help address, and I've been trying to help in this regard too, is plastic pollution. So plastic pollution arises from many types of products, and it occurs in some that you wouldn't even think of, like face wash contains some microplastics. But then there are, you know, the obvious things like single-use plastic water bottles and plastic grocery bags that we use. So these kinds of plastics create some problems in the environment because they degrade very slowly in the environment, and then their presence can disrupt a lot of natural processes that we as humans depend on, you know, just for everyday our daily lives. So anything we can do to eliminate plastic in our daily lives can help reduce this plastic pollution. So think about not using single-use plastic items, and that can be a way that we can all help reduce plastic pollution in the environment.
It all goes back to the impact we have on our individual selves, but how it has a broader or greater impact on the collective, and how we have to think about what we do today and how that can impact others. And like you said, using reusable containers and that sort of thing are not only good for us, but good for the environment, which is a really key point. Maitreyi, last question for you. What's the hardest part of your job?
So yeah, I get the downer question. I think that the hardest part of my job is that for a lot of my life, how hard I worked was kind of related to how well I did, or kind of the results of my hard work. And that's not always the case for everyone, but I feel like that's a general rule. In science, when you're doing research, sometimes that is absolutely not the case. And sometimes there's a lot of factors that are completely out of your control. So one of my biggest fears is sometimes I'll do something, I've been spending a lot of time on it. If I'm hold something and I sneeze, I could be ruining a week's worth of hard work. And so science involves a lot of failure, and I think it's hard not to take that personally, and it's hard to keep going when you're doing experiments of any sort, or if you're in a different field, you're coding, if you're, whatever it is that you're doing, you might experience a lot of failure. So that's what makes it hard. But I will say that that is what also makes it really important, as some other people have hinted, to have a good set of people around you. So you need people who share that mindset and realize that failure is a part of science, and that can't, don't put pressure on you without understanding how the process works and how many kind of obstacles there might be. So that's what I'd say is the hardest. And I did want to circle back because I thought of an answer to the very first question about resources for connecting to applications of science. I was just thinking about that while other people were answering. And I think especially right now, it's really hard because a lot of standard answers would be like, try to visit facilities and, learn about some of those things. But if you're not already there, social media is actually a really good way to connect with scientists. I think I don't have a huge presence, but there's a lot of people on science Twitter who are constantly posting about what their jobs are like, kind of the reality of what research is like, and that you can probably connect with through that forum as well. So if that's your thing, then there is a lot of science social media out there.
No, that's great. Thank you for sharing that. And if I could go back to your comment, I think it's really impactful, especially as females and women. We sometimes have this mindset that we should do things with perfection. And I think by recognizing that science requires you to be forgiving in terms of what failures can come about that are outside of your control, and that's okay. That doesn't mean that you're any less in terms of being a scientist. So that's a really great point, I think, and a good segue for us to shift and open things up to questions.
All right, we have a few questions in the queue. So let's start with, I think this one is for Nichole. And that question is, does the detection of COVID in wastewater give insight to active cases or community exposure? What does it give insight to?
Yeah, thanks for the question. So the goal here with measuring coronavirus in wastewater, which is the virus that SARS-CoV-2 is the coronavirus that causes COVID-19. So the idea is that if we can use non-invasive community pools of a sample instead of individual samples, that we can get a sense of what the prevalence of infection is in the community. So the idea is we can use this to understand infection levels without having to test every individual. So the idea is that wastewater monitoring can be predictive of community prevalence. So I will say, though, we're not there yet. So it's still a little bit complicated on how we make that transition from A to predicting B, but we're that's part of the research, and we're trying to address that question right now. And then the hope is too that while we're trying to tackle the current problem, that this kind of monitoring can be used in the future for a variety of different applications, so that we're ready for the next time wastewater monitoring is needed.
Thank you, Nichole. The next question is for Katherine. Katherine, how did you get interested in COVID-19 research, and was there a specific path that you followed in school?
That is a great question. If you had asked me that I'd be doing the work I'm doing now a year ago, I would have never in a million years imagined I'd be working on this. Throughout school, like I said, I initially wasn't in high school. I didn't realize I'd be interested in science and math, but as I was in an undergraduate program and then worked on my PhD, I became increasingly interested in environmental sciences and the research process in general. So when I started at EPA, I didn't have a strong background in microbiology like a lot of these women here today, but instead I had a background in numerical modeling and conducting different type of lab experiments. But once the pandemic came around and there was a big need at EPA to conduct different types of research related to COVID-19, my group started to conduct this disinfection related research, looking at surfaces and now more recently the air, and understanding how to clean those different types of surfaces and also the air to keep us safe and reduce the risk of transmission. So that is not something that I had ever studied before. None of the disinfection techniques. I was not, like I said, not a microbiologist, but instead what I had was training as a researcher and the problem solving skills that are needed to address any type of scientific problem, and have experience in conducting research and going out and figuring out where to find the data that I need and connect with the people I need to connect with, different types of subject matter experts to pull into a team to create a really strong research project team to help advance the science. So no, I had no idea that I'd be doing this, but what I did focus on in school was developing those skill sets that can be applied not only to what I was working on in school, but to really any type of research problem. So what I think is really fun about working at a place like EPA is that we're really driven by what the priorities are. So in certain places like academia, it may be easier to focus on one particular topic or certain types of subject matter that you spend a lot of time focusing on. But here at EPA or in other types of federal or state agencies, we're really driven by what the priorities are and where the needs are. So when my boss came and told me we need you to work on COVID-19 research, I dropped some of the other things that I was doing and had to come work on what I'm doing now. So I'm really excited to be able to take the skill sets that I've learned from that prior work and apply it here. Great question.
Thanks, Katherine. I have two questions for Eunice. So the first one is, what made you get into biology? And the second one is, what do you like best about working in the federal government versus industry or academia?
Yeah, with biology, these are both good questions. With biology, I would say, like I said, my biologist science teacher in high school, and she opening up this whole view of how the cell is impacted by the environment. I think that's where I got really interested. And later on, I realized how many aspects of biology there are, including microbiology and, like biochemistry is part of a biology area. There's all kinds of different types of areas in biology that you can study. So that's kind of how I got interested in biology. With the federal government, as you probably know, federal government is paid by tax dollars, so it's paid by all of you. So our first and foremost job is to be public servants for all of you, to make sure that we're doing the best to keep you guys safe. And here at the EPA, one of the goals that we have with EPA is to make sure that your water, the earth, and the air is kept clean. Specifically, our research areas really focus a lot on the water side of things. So we want to make sure the water that comes from your tap is clean enough and safe enough for you to drink. And so that's our main goal. And so I love that we have this very public servant oriented research. It's not research oriented towards making money. It's research oriented to keeping you safe. And so I would say that that is like one of the perks of working in the federal government.
Thanks, Eunice. That was great. The next question is for Shannon. And the question is, how is the saliva test that you had different from the COVID testing where they stick a swab up your nose?
That's an excellent question. So the first thing I want to say is that our saliva test is a research tool. So it's not a diagnostic tool. We don't tell you that you're actively infected with the virus. And the other thing is that this saliva test that we've developed is measuring your antibody response. So it's an indication of infection. Whereas when you get the swab up the nose, they're actually looking for the nucleic acid from the virus, so the presence of the virus. So ours is kind of an indication of infection rather than looking at the presence of the virus in an active infection.
Great, thank you. I'm going to ask this one to Maitreyi. Is it ever scary when researching things on COVID-19?
That's a good question. I think, so our group started, well, okay, Nicole and Emily, I believe Nicole started in like May, Emily started in June or something. So they were kind of the bravest on the forefront, going in the building, doing some of this work before we really knew how safe it was. Nicole initially had to wear a respirator when she was working with wastewater. And then over time, it became clear that the risk from of contracting COVID-19 from wastewater work, so again, I'm talking specifically about the kind of work that we do, seems to be very, very low. There does not seem to be a risk of contracting it from working with the actual wastewater. And so honestly, the scariest part is going into work and interacting with people to the extent that we've had to. Now in these federal buildings, we still have to do lots of distancing. There's not a lot of people that have come back to work. Most people are still teleworking. But for those of us that are doing coronavirus wastewater work, I think that the most dangerous part is the part where you interact with your coworkers.
Thank you. We have one more question for you, Maitreyi, while you're up there. What are some things young people can do to help protect the health of phytoplankton? I didn't know that over 50% of oxygen comes from phytoplankton.
That is a really good question. So let me think about that. One of the things I think Nicole touched on a little bit, right? So ocean health is affected by plastics really strongly, and especially microplastics or other substances that are leaching harmful chemicals can impact phytoplankton communities quite a bit. Another issue that we have is that, so this isn't necessarily, well, okay, so this is interesting because it's not helping phytoplankton. This is a case where phytoplankton might be the bad guys. So sometimes when we have too much nutrient runoff into bodies of water, what happens is that plankton love it, they grow, and then you have what's called a bloom of some sort. And so that can sometimes be a harmful algal bloom where it releases toxins into the water and then we can't swim. We might have to look at the quality of that water. And sometimes because the phytoplankton bloom, organisms start to eat them and those organisms suck up all the oxygen from the water. And then you have what's called a dead zone, and that can kill the fish and the other life in the water. So I don't know if the way that we need to be thinking about it is what we can do to help the phytoplankton so much as what are the ways that we can positively impact the ocean environment as a whole, because sometimes they're the good guys and sometimes they're the bad guys.
Awesome, thanks, Maitreyi. So the next question is kind of generic, so I'm just going to throw it out there, and somebody raised their hand that I can see and no one else can see right now, but and we'll throw you up live. But when did you know that you wanted to be a scientist, and how did you know what type of scientist you wanted to be? All right, I'm going to have to pick someone. I'm going to go with Shannon.
Okay, so I would say that as a child, I was a very, very curious little critter, and I loved to observe the world around me. So I spent so much time kind of digging in the mud, probably having a mud pie or two, turning over rocks, just like observing everything around me. And then just like Eunice, when I was in high school, my freshman biology teacher had this enthusiasm for science that was just so unbelievably infectious. And I think it gave me some kind of outlet for me to kind of think about science. And so at that point, I was loving biology, but I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do. So I ended up getting a bachelor's in biology, and then I moved on for a master's primarily in lipid biochemistry. And I've just been trying all sorts of different fields in science to figure out, I think, what I'm most passionate about. And as I told you, I am currently in a PhD in epidemiology, so I guess I still haven't figured it out. I do love science, and right now I think my thing is epidemiology. So I think the takeaway there is that you don't have to have all of the answers. You can try it all and just be patient and kind to yourself as you navigate the way.
And while you're up on the screen, I have one more question for you.
Okay.
At least I think this should be for you, but is the use and studies of antibodies helpful for the development of the COVID vaccine?
Yes, absolutely. So one of the things that we need to think about is once you have antibodies against SARS-CoV-2, remember the virus that's responsible for COVID, what level of protection does that give you from, either getting infected yourself or infecting others? So it is important for us to understand who has antibodies and how long do they have them and how do we get them? Is it from natural infection? Is that different than the antibodies you get from the vaccine? So these are all really important research questions, and it will help us to kind of mitigate the risk from not just SARS-CoV-2, but emerging pathogens in the future.
Great, thank you. I'm going to ask the next question to Eunice. What do my grades or extracurriculars need to look like to become a scientist like you?
Oh, all A's and do everything you can. No, just kidding. I'm just kidding. Your grades don't have to be perfect. But one thing what I would like to kind of really encourage is that you do your best and try to learn as much as you can in high school in all of your classes. And if you start seeing some interest, for example, kind of like what we were talking about, some of us, including Shannon, about if you're inspired by a specific field, then start talking to that teacher and see what other things you can do extracurricularly oriented to that. So for example, one thing you could do is in the summer, you could do science camps. There's a lot of science camps around, and some of them can be a little expensive, but they give some kind of discount depending on, what kind of discount you need. And so these science camps can open your eyes to a lot of areas. So don't try to do a whole bunch of extracurriculars. Try to do extracurriculars in the field that you're interested in and do multiple in that area. Another thing that you can do is to start to shadow scientists. So for example, if you know a scientist, or even if you need to get connected to a scientist, EPA is a great mentoring program where you can get connected to scientists. And so connect yourself to scientists and shadow or learn something in their area, and you'll be able to see whether that's something that you would want to do, or you'll at least learn advantages and disadvantages of that position and what you like and what you don't like about those different positions.
Awesome, thanks Eunice. I'm going to ask the next question to Emily. Emily, did you actively seek mentorship throughout your career?
Yes, I think that is a very accurate way to describe it. I think from high school, yeah, again, my high school biology teacher, I definitely sought her out, especially, when I started learning more about science, and I really enjoyed it. She was my big resource, and she, your teachers, they have connections. So if, you like something and they come across an internship or, whatever it could be, they have you in mind because you're right there and you're asking questions, and they know that you will enjoy it versus another student who, has interest and does really great and has A's, but might not have a passion for it. And then from high school going into college, I knew I wanted to study biology. I wasn't sure what part of biology, but I went to Thomas More College in Kentucky here. What I liked about that was that I didn't have to decide right away. It wasn't like I went into biology and I was stuck either pre-med or environmental or whatever. It was, they really encouraged me to try all different parts of it. And it wasn't until my junior year that I finally was like, I like water and I like microbes. How can I mix this too? And I definitely tried marine science. I worked at a Newport aquarium for a while, and I tried working on a boat with fish populations, and I did not do well. So, but I'm glad I did it, because if I didn't, I could be on a boat in the middle of the ocean right now, and I would be unhappy. But I think through all of that, I did have a certain person that I definitely looked towards and ask questions and try to learn from. And then that kind of followed through to my graduate studies. And then here at the EPA, I started with Eunice, and you know, it was funny because she chose me for the internship or student contractor work that I applied for. And I missed what she asked me when on the phone, because I was actually on my way for another job. And I didn't realize I was talking to Eunice at the EPA, which is like the dream job, until I was almost done. And so then I thought, oh, there, I just blew that. But I think Eunice told me once that it was my honesty and my willingness to learn and know that I don't have experience in a lot of experience in parasitology, which is what she studied here, but I'm willing to learn. I can do this. So yeah, Eunice has been my mentor, and then that went right into Nicole Brinkman and about viruses and bacteria. And so yeah, it's definitely I definitely have a lot of mentors over the years, and you always you can always learn something new from everybody.
Thank you, Emily. And we're going to wrap it up with this last question. I'm going to give it to Katherine, because she's the one that I know has the example for us on this. But how do different areas of science work together in EPA to fight something like COVID-19? Do you have an example of how different researchers working on different topics work together on a solution?
Yeah, that is a great question, and it's something that I'm grateful that we get to do every day here at EPA. So I work with a team of very diverse scientists and engineers. So for one example that comes to mind, we've been doing a lot of work in partnership with large transit agencies. So like the New York City subway and the Los Angeles Metro, and we've been working with them to understand what types of technologies would be effective to help clean and disinfect their rail cars and their subway cars after people are gone, and even while people are on the car. So we've been working with these transit agencies. So I'm working closely with the people who run the trains and clean the trains and operate all the logistics that go into that. And I'm also working with my EPA team, which includes me, so a physical scientist. I'm working closely with physicists who are experts on things like the UV light that could be used to disinfect the car. We work closely with microbiologists, obviously, to understand what kinds of impacts the different types of technologies would have on the different microbes. And then we also work closely with like the managers, so high up at EPA, but also, for example, like the chief innovation officer at some of these large transit agencies. So EPA really tries to bring together lots of people from different backgrounds, because we all have these different perspectives on how to tackle these problems. And when you come together as a team and apply everybody's skill sets, that can be really effective in understanding what that holistic view of addressing that problem might look like. So we try to work together as best we can.
Thanks, Katherine. And we're right at 2 o'clock, but I'm going to ask Kenya to wrap it up for us. And I put in the chat that you can email us at caesarcoms@epa.gov, and you can see it in the chat if you have any follow-up questions. Turn it over to you, Kenya.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I'm so excited to hear from all of you. It's great that the audience had an opportunity to ask such interesting and engaging questions. I want to thank each of you again for your time and your insights and sharing your personal stories as well. And if there's any parting thoughts of wisdom, please share them. Otherwise, thanks again.
Thanks, Kenya. Again, if you have questions for the researchers and you'd like to share them, please email them to caesarcoms@epa.gov, and that's CESERCOMMS@epa.gov. Thank you, everyone, for attending.
Thank you.